Paranormal M brings you stories that challenge the boundaries of reality. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for haunting episodes every week. Are you ready to be captivated by the unexplained? Mysterious calls. Who is using my voice? For some years now, I've experienced a phenomenon that still follows me to this day. It was December 2019 when I was doing something we call the Novena de Navidad. In Colombia, a ritual for the anticipation of December 24th. After the celebration, one of my friends called my phone. But since I was outside, I stared at it for a moment. Then I put it into my pocket. When I got home, I returned the call to that friend, who, upon hearing my voice, said, "Are you happy again?" Immediately, I asked her what that was all about. She told me that just a while ago I'd been feeling sad. My suspicions grew because I hadn't spoken to this friend in about a week. I asked her what she meant since we hadn't talked for quite a while. To my surprise, my friend said that just a few seconds ago she had hung up on the phone with me. I immediately checked my call history, but only that missed call from my friend was there. I kept asking her until facing her, I asked her to send me a screenshot of her call history. Surprisingly, there it was. A call lasting a few minutes made from my phone. According to my friend, I had first greeted her and said I was playing, like LOL. I guess a video game I really enjoyed at the time. Then, after my friend responded, the person on the other end of the phone, whose voice she swore was exactly the same as mine, asked about another one of my friends, a friend that we both knew. The call ended in a rushed goodbye because my friend read the message I sent once I got home. Thought it was strange that I'd sent it while talking to her. Once she finished telling me the story, we tried to recreate the phenomenon again and again. But we only managed to get someone on the other side picking up for a few seconds with no sound at all. Happened again the next morning. My second friend called my phone while I was asleep. Someone with my exact voice started singing while showering on the other end. I, on the other hand, was still asleep. When I woke up, I only had a message from my second friend saying I should call her when I was done showering. I quickly interrogated her. The same phenomena occurred. The call was registered in her phone, but not in mine. I asked her the same questions. Someone with my exact voice was answering the calls that I couldn't. The phenomenon didn't occur again until December 2023. I came back from work tired, and after doing the well-known Novena de Navidad, I called one of my friends. When she answered, I heard nothing but her younger, distorted voice. Naturally, I hung up. Later, she returned the call, and when I asked her about the distorted call, she denied having even called me. I had the call in my history, but she didn't. Then, in December of 2024, I was on my way to my partner's house because she had asked me to come over. When I arrived, I noticed that she wasn't there. When I asked her about it, she told me that I had called her to tell her to come to my house. All this was from my number and with my voice. A call I didn't make, and unlike my previous cases, it didn't show up in her call history. Worth mentioning that throughout the years, I have had different contact numbers and phones. That's uncomfortable. I encountered something when I was 6. I've created a brand new account, for this is often like to write research papers, and I don't really want my admission of this encounter to discredit any of my future papers. When I was a child, I lived in a very distressing environment. My father, although not violent, was extremely manipulative and verbally abusive to me and my mother. My mom did the best job she possibly could of shielding me from the damage he did to those around him, but it still left me with terrible anxiety and depression from a very young age. I remember multiple instances where I hallucinated distressing things, but none of them were truly unexplainable. When I was 4, my doctor prescribed me a high dose of prescription-strength Benadryl. It's not suitable for children. I theorize it's because of this that the first night I took them, I hallucinated a writhing, slithering carpet of spiders covering the floor. I had that exact same thing. Needless to say, my mom never took me back to that doctor and began taking me to actual specialized pediatricians. Later in my life, at the age of 10, I experienced sleep paralysis. I don't remember much of it, but I remember seeing shadow people staring at me from the darkest parts of my room. Despite these encounters, only one is truly unexplainable to me. No medication, no sleep paralysis, nothing. One night when I was 6 years old, I couldn't sleep. This was normal for me, but this time I felt as if I was being watched. At some point, an hour or so into the night, I got thirsty. I still felt as if I was being watched, but at the time, I didn't think these fears were rational. My anxiety often mimicked this feeling. I walked into the hallway and immediately felt an immense drop in temperature. This wasn't unusual, though, as my room was far better insulated than the rest of the house. I continued making my way to the kitchen to get a glass of water, but I stopped as soon as I saw it. The living room was directly next to the kitchen. They were separated by one thin wall, so you could see the kitchen and living room from the hallway. In the middle of the living room, standing in the center of the room, was a massive humanoid shadow creature. It was extremely skinny and roughly 9 feet tall. It had to bend over to fit under the ceiling. It had a face that was constantly smiling. In fact, the face was the only part of it that wasn't completely pitch black. It stared at me, smiling, as I stood there, completely unable to fathom what I was even looking at. And then it waved. That's when my survival instincts kicked in. I spun around and ran as fast as I could back to my bedroom. I couldn't really hear it move, but I could feel it getting closer to me. I slammed my door shut as I got in my bedroom, and I immediately slid underneath my bed. I watched the crack under the door from under my bed, unmoving. I watched as its feet stood at the door before it slid underneath the door. It was as if it lost all shape and became a two-dimensional puddle of pure darkness. This formless puddle approached my bed before the creature went back to what it was before and stood in front of my bed. It reached its hand under the bed and wrapped its fingers under the foot of the bed. I could only watch in horror as its eyes and smiling mouth poked out from under the bed. I screamed as loud as I possibly could as it did this, and a few seconds later, my mom came bolting into the room. As she opened the door, the creature vanished. I cannot explain what I saw that day, nor can I ask anyone to believe it. But I wanted to put it out there somewhere, and I figured this would be a pretty good place to do so. Have a good night, everyone. Boring Ghost. So, I live in one of the older apartment complexes in Portland. It's built in the 40s after the war. I've lived here for a little bit over 5 years, and from day one I could tell that there was someone else in the apartment. I chalked it up to a mischievous ghost and tried to placate it by acknowledging it. But the prank started to interfere with day-to-day life, and after a few incidents I attempted to clean up the space. My then roommate tried to chalk it up to me misplacing things and being a pothead, until it started messing with him. When guests started noticing, I became more adamant that there was a ghost, started warning people to keep an eye on their things. Examples mainly included things being moved around and lost, wallets, keys, shoes, phones, cigarettes. Pretty much all the things you need to leave the house on time. The most common things that would happen would be something like this. You're getting ready to go to work. You put your keys, your wallet, and your phone in the chain, and then you go brush your teeth. When you come back to leave, one of those things are missing. So you tear the whole house apart, and when you're back to the chair, bam! Your keys, wallet, phone have been found, but in a weird spot that they couldn't have got back to without help, like under the chair or under a cushion. Guests would wake up in the morning to find their shoes had not only moved, but separated and hidden. Like they'd leave their shoes at the end of the bed, and then in the morning, one shoe would be in the kitchen, the other would be deep under the couch. My friend, who was my roommate when we moved in, actually had an actual meltdown once. He adamantly did not believe in ghosts. He thought I was moving his cigarettes and keys and hoodie and bike lock to fuck with him. I'm no sadist, and I don't smoke. He moved out after a little under a year. Couldn't ever explain why stuff kept getting moved. My super skeptical engineer boyfriend, who scoffs at my mystical bent, has also had a few experiences that he keeps trying to explain away, but can't quite do it. The overt activity had stopped since I did a cleansing ceremony, which in itself bears mentioning. This was about 7 months ago. I burned sage and lit a candle in a small glass of votive. An old dear friend had made this. I decided to burn the sage and hold the candle while I repeated a prayer that's important to me. I decided to say the prayer 3 times, and during the 3rd recitation, the glass of votive exploded in my hand. Luckily, I wasn't hurt and pushed through the final recitation despite my shock. Since then, another experience, I don't feel like typing because of my hand, and the activity was mostly stopped, except the following. My alarm clock radio station keeps getting changed, which boyfriend keeps trying to pass off as temperature changes, in which I could accept as an explanation, except that sometimes it switches to AM, which requires a button flip, not just a dial adjustment. And the kicker, the reason I'm finally writing this, that's because this morning, and other mornings, it switched just to static. So I sleep through it, and only does that when I really need to be up for something, like when I have a doctor's appointment, or when I need to be at work early. And for those of you asking, why don't you just use the alarm clock on your phone? Well, a super skeptical engineer boyfriend bought me the alarm clock because phone alarms are inexplicably, randomly unreliable in my apartment. But not his, or anyone else's. So this morning I woke up a half an hour late, just murmuring quiet static. I still don't feel that this presence is malevolent, just attention-seeking. Scary condos. I once was so deeply in love with this girl that we always stayed in her house, and I would literally miss school to be at her house. And in her bed, I'll always have a spot for you. But her house always gave me literal creeps. It would always make me feel like I was being watched the second I walked up those steps. Couldn't for the life of me stay there alone when she was at work. I would always see orbs in her room and wake up at around 2 or 3 a.m. almost every night with the feeling of breathing on my face. I believe it was an old woman who used to live in a house before the condos got put up there, and she'd just be mad at everyone. I've had multiple friends leave the property over seeing this woman or feeling weird about the condo complex all the time. Well, anyways, I'd always see stuff like one night we'd just be driving around late at night on a road, and I knew this road by heart. Never seen anything out of the ordinary. But this night was different. We drove up this hill and we'd seen a woman walking, which is really not normal. And this was a nice neighborhood. Never ever seen walkers or bikers on this road. But this woman had an attire like she was in the 50s. Had a polka dot dress on and a pink purse. She also had, puffed up hair. Or perm. It's like they did it in the 50s. We drove past her and I seen her eyes, and they're completely black. No whites in the eyes whatsoever. I had the hairs on my arms stick straight up, and we drove faster and faster to get away from that woman. Long story short, I ended up having to move away from this girl to be able to stay at my own place, and the night I got away, my ceiling fan, which had been broke for 2 years with no movement whatsoever, turned on at 3:30 a.m. Started spinning backwards. Stood up from the room and demanded the sport leave my house in the name of Jesus. I think they meant spirit. That I wasn't afraid of it, or I wasn't in that experience. I've just went to this girl's house again, nor have I spoke to her. And we really were in love. Just couldn't imagine being taunted for the rest of my life. The UFO from 7 years ago. A cancer survivor story. I was camping with an ex in 2015. It was very late, probably 1 a.m. or later. Her cousin and her boyfriend were in a tent on the property that we were at. A small lake on a private property owned by my ex's grandpa in the sticks of Freeburg, Illinois. Our tent had a hole with a screen that you could watch the sky from. I've went back to this story so many times. It was blocked from my memory for at least 3 or 4 years after it happened. Keep that part in mind. I noticed something in the sky. I thought it could be a plane, but the more I stared, the more I noticed it was completely circular, with a constant dim white light in the very middle and nothing else. But I could clearly see the outline of the ship from the moonlight. I asked her, "You see that?" She said yes. That very moment, it stopped above the tent, and its light just became like staring into all the dead lights but white. Within what seemed like a few seconds, the light went to its original glow, and the craft went from a prone position to out of sight within 5 seconds. I remembered nothing else after that night. I remember seeing that light and seeing it leave. Never talked about anything. The next morning, you'd think you'd have to be like, "Dude, do you remember that fucking craft?" It wasn't until really years later, while I was stuck in St. Louis University Hospital undergoing chemo for leukemia, and it just came back. Then it hit me. How silent that craft was. We were camping far away from people for miles. That craft, a normal craft, would have shaken her tent being so close. And now I speak on the maybe 5 months later, I'm puking up blood at my friend's house for over a day. I didn't have insurance, and I was afraid of hospitals because, well, people die there. Months passed. My ex and I broke up months before that night. By April of 2016, when I saw a doctor, I saw that craft in 2015 in July, I was diagnosed with leukemia, basically homeless and suicidal. I attempted such and failed, obviously, tried to put off treatment until November of 2016. I wasn't supposed to make it according to statistics, but that's what they told me. The few I had who cared check on me. I met my wife, a total stranger, over Facebook the day I checked in. A few days later, she met me in person. I told her of all of my troubles, all of my wrongdoings, all of my flaws, and that I was dying. She still met me. Within days, I no longer wanted the cancer to win. She gave me hope. I finished reading the Harry Potter series a few months and officially becoming a reader. And not long after, I read It. That was my first Stephen King book. I then collected most of them over the years, and I was never supposed to have children after chemo, yet we're blessed with 2. That's because almost 7 years later, that stranger's my wife. I think maybe, did this craft give me radiation sickness and therefore leukemia, a blood cancer that isn't passed down through genes? I say maybe. And maybe did they do other things to me I can't remember? And also maybe, did they save my life? This isn't some story I made up. This is as real to me as anything. This is the past 7 years of my life, and I don't think for certain it was a craft that did it, but maybe it was. Regardless, I may not be in the best shape health-wise. My best friend passed away in 2014. I was in school at the time, so I was distraught and didn't know how I would carry on living. To this day, even being married with kids, I'm still feeling like my life is just an epilogue, like my life was paused that day and found out he died. Fair to say, I was gutted. Anyways, I got really into my PC gaming and would play Counter-Strike with my other friends the friends I met in college. And it's funny because thinking back on it, I never felt alone, even if it was just me and my friends and all of us being busy. One night I dreamt about him. He met me at the Spear Pillar, the location from a Pokemon game we both loved. He hugged me, and it was as if he was his young self and had matured while being 2 or 3 years on the other side. I felt his stubble against my cheek, and it was very surreal. Further on, he told me I needed to stop worrying and that he's always with me, be it on the bus, chilling at home, or at college. He said he was always there. Then he said something that quite frankly blew my mind. He mentioned how it's nice of me to keep the spot at the end of my bed clear for him to sit down on. It's his favorite spot every night. He loves watching me play CSGO, especially with my mates. The conversations made him laugh, and he said no matter where I am, he'll find me and keep me company. Crazy because subconsciously I'd always clear my bed, and bearing in mind my room wasn't always the tidiest. As an adult, I've gotten better at being tidy. I'm so glad to have met him, and even when I'm away on deployment or even putting my kids to bed, I still feel him around, and it makes me feel happy and very nostalgic. In 2017, I got a tattoo dedicated to him too. It was my first ever tattoo. I just miss my friend. Was it supposed to happen? So my brother passed away in March of 2020. He was 18 years old, and it was due to a car accident. So many weird things going on pertaining to his death. He was ejected from the car, and his body landed in front of a house with the address number 777. When you look at the address on Google Maps, a Subaru was driving by that address at the time Google took the photo. My brother also drove a Subaru. My cousin was best friends with my brother. My cousin's girlfriend's sister was the car coming the other way, and the sister found my brother. Out of everybody who could have been passing by at the time, it was someone we knew. Another young man passes away due to an accident less than a quarter-mile down the road from my brother's accident. Me and my family thought the best way to process our grief was to see a psychic medium. It was a group session. My family, the last ones to be seated, well, and of everybody we could have been seated next to was the mother of the kid who had died by my brother's side. What do you think of these coincidences? Is it the universe speaking? It's always speaking. Do ghosts mimic voices? I've encountered this on a few different occasions. So this started about a year ago. I'd recently moved to my girlfriend's house in the sticks of Pennsylvania. She and her 2 children had moved to the home. That was about 2 years prior. She bought the house on foreclosure, and she redid most of it. The only info she got was an elderly woman and her daughters lived there previously. If I were to guess, the house was built maybe the 60s or the 70s. Could be older. So this is what's going on. She's a teacher, so her and the kids are outdoor at about 8:30 a.m. at the latest. I leave for work at around 10 a.m. I'm usually in the back bedroom, maybe getting ready for work alone. And I've literally heard the front door open and my girl talking. I can never make out what she's saying. It's just the exact sound of her coming in the door with her keys. It's wild. Thing is, she's not home. Nobody is. My pit bull is also alerted by this and runs to the door before I even hear it. My dog also will go right up to the door and growl sometimes. That's when no one is there. I would think that she forgot something or come home from work early, and I would go greet her, but nothing's ever there. This has happened maybe 4 or 5 times in the year. Since I've become aware of it, nothing has happened. That was until we got back from our trip from North Carolina. First night back, we get home, and we're relaxing, kids are in bed, my girl's asleep, and I'm kneeling by the bed, and my phone's catching up on some work emails. The dogs are at my mother's house because she's watching them since we were gone. And I repeat, the dogs are not home. I distinctly hear my pit bull or something growl. I first let it go as maybe it's my imagination. I hear it for a second time. The only way I can describe it is as being almost identical to what it sounds like when my pit hears something at the front door. Like a curious growl. At this point, I'm like, okay, what the I just continue doing my thing. Then I hear it clear as day, like it's like a fucking growl. Now I'm bugging out. Like no one else seems to hear or witness the stuff, and why is it only me? I instantly wake my girl up and tell her what happened. So we sit to listen, and of course we don't hear it again. Nothing's happened since. I don't know, maybe I'm just bugging, but it's super weird, and any info would be greatly appreciated. Nightmares and mimics. I've never really known about mimics until I read a post on here from a Redditor hearing their child in another room. This was super alarming for me to read up about. I have a few questions hopefully somebody can enlighten me with. When I was younger, less than 10 years old, I would wake up in the middle of the night or even be chilling in my room and would hear my dad aggressively yelling my name. As I'd go out and ask if they called for me, it would usually be a no. I always thought it was my head playing games, but for something to sound so real and terrifying like I was in trouble haunted me. During this time of my life, I would also experience terrible nightmares that seemed very physical. My room's the first room of the only hallway in a very small house. This, I wouldn't even call it a dream, would happen multiple times a month for years. I could be dreaming of anything good or bad, whatever, and I'd hear aggressive running and stomping down the house. It'd be coming toward me. Swing open my door and almost felt like it jumped on me, as I said. Felt like big sacks of flour being thrown on my back. And it was always when I was laying on my back toward the door. I'd turn around, my door was closed as if nothing happened, but I felt it. As I started to grow a little, I would experiment and would cover the back of my head and ears with a blanket, thinking that if they didn't see me, they'd leave me alone. It cut down, but it didn't stop completely. It's done now, and I can't remember the last time I've ever experienced a problem with that, or something similar. So I know it wasn't sleep paralysis. Any tips or anybody possibly know what this was that traumatized me by sleeping with my back away from the door? Ask Reddit. A bit of a backstory. The house used to have a couple of apartments. One of those tenants murders his wife in the house. He's arrested and thrown in prison for many, many years. Grandparents later move in, remodeled, and pass it on to my mom when I was born. Here are a few encounters that stand out. The guitar incident. My brother 8 and I 12 were about to go sleep. He just starts crying uncontrollably. He's saying he's scared to go to sleep. He looked and sounded genuinely so, suddenly upset, and he's normally very calm. I finally help calm him, and we both fall asleep. A few hours later, my brother wakes up crying again and gets out of bed and wakes me up. As soon as I opened my eyes and sat up, my guitar that was hanging on the far wall about 8 feet away smashes against my headboard as though somebody lifted it and threw it hard at my head. We both screamed, but I chalked it up to my fault for hanging it wrong. But I knew it could have lifted itself up, or that it couldn't, and then it propelled itself forward. Stayed awake the rest of the night thinking every possible explanation that could have made that happen. I used to always have vivid nightmares about a scary woman who seemed to always be in my mom's walk-in closet. She'd come out at night and hurt my mom. One time, she was putting needs into her pincushion. Needles. When she was hauntingly and rapidly punching my mom's face, but it was like Mike, my mom was made of clay. So she'd get horrendously distorted, and when she was trying to escape the room to get my brother and sisters, but my mom was there. She couldn't get to us, which was odd considering the door of the closet was just an accordion door. One day, my mom's siblings and I were downstairs eating lunch. And that's when my middle sister, who's 4, comes downstairs crying hysterically. They say that there's something scary in Mom's closet moving the door. So my mom and I go check it out, with all the siblings and all that creeping behind me. I opened the door, about to go in, watching to see if there's any movement. Nothing happened, so I started to walk toward it, and the door started to move the slightest bit, and I paused. Then all of a sudden, it looked like there was a crowd of people behind the door punching with all their might to get out. The door came out of the tracks on the top and the bottom. The rattle noise was loud and rapid, like it was a machine gun. The unfathomable fear I felt physically made me ill. We ran as fast as we possibly could out of that house to the neighbors. We had the neighbor go in and check if somebody or something was in there. They checked it out, saw nothing but a beaten-up door off its tracks. Moved about a month later. These were only touching the surface of the many experiences that we've had, from orbs to lights turning on and off and doors locking and unlocking themselves. Very inconvenient. If you'd like to hear more, let me know. Rhythm rooms. This is a really strange experience I've had quite a few times in my life, but less and less so as I've become older, to the point now where it's been at least 4 or 5 years since the last time. It's only lasted a few minutes then. I want to know if anybody else has experienced something similar. The best way I can describe it is a feeling that I've temporarily jumped into a parallel universe. It's where everything looks the same. There's one key difference. It feels like the room has a heartbeat. Every other sound and sensation becomes pulled into line with this rhythm. My own heartbeat feels like it starts to synchronize. Even the thoughts in my own head, I hear them as if they've been quantized to a grid set by a rhythm that's happening. When in a rhythm room, I feel compelled to remain seated. Instinctively, don't want to explore that universe any further or find out what, if anything, is beyond the door. So far, it's only ever happened at home, and only when I'm very still. It used to happen semi-regularly when I was trying to fall asleep. When I was a lot younger, those episodes felt like they went on for hours. But it's also happened in the daytime, like when I've been sitting still and I usually snap out of it and back to reality within a few minutes. Quite a distressing sensation, and one that's difficult to describe clearly. The scarred woman of the girls' restroom. Their story. One day in the girls' restroom, a girl and her gay friend were freshening up when the friend littered. Suddenly, a scary woman with a scarred face appeared and became furious. The incident was reported to the school administration. The story spread among the students. The guard even recounted the incident, and they burned incense in the restroom that night to appease her. My own encounter and story. If you've seen my previous post, you'll know this is the time I frequently encountered ghosts. This happened during my second year of college, but I sensed something scary about that restroom from the moment I first enrolled. Can't quite describe the feeling. Heavy sense of dread when entering, so I rarely used it. Though the other 2 restrooms also had a strange atmosphere, albeit a bit less intense. One day, or perhaps a week later, we were just waiting for our next class. I decided to stay in the corridor while my classmates were either absent or searching for available classrooms because ours was occupied. The corridor is right next to that restroom, and fearing I'd miss my classmates if they found a room, I decided to use it. As I put one foot in the doorway, I saw her face, completely scarred. I saw her in the window. I immediately ran out next to the restroom. It's an open basketball court. You might think it was a prank, but the window's on the outside overlooking the open court. If someone had been playing a trick, I would have seen them running away near the restroom window. But there was no one there. This was during class time, so few students were around. Additional information. Of course, as usual, I didn't tell anyone. People often dismiss ghosts as non-existent, and I understand that. So I kept quiet. However, I have confirmation of what I saw. Don't usually bring up the topic, but it eventually comes up in conversation, and people's descriptions often match what I've seen. Someone who owns a business near the school mentioned a janitress who died in a fire there. Janitor? I didn't know those were gendered. One of my classmates also recounted the incident in the restroom, sharing that information with us. I know it might sound unscared and boring to read, but experiencing it firsthand is entirely different. I had a horrifying experience with something unknown. Anyone ever encountered this type of entity? My best friend and I took a short vacation to the northern part of Mitten in Michigan. Last night, we decided to go to this old cemetery that my dad always took us kids to when we were younger. That way we could explore and do something a little bit spooky. My dad also went there as a kid with his siblings, so we have a long history of adventuring here. I know this place like the back of my hand. The The cemetery is down a good 20-plus miles of rough dirt and two-track roads, hard to stumble onto without knowledge of its existence. There are no houses nearby for miles, and there's usually forest-dwelling creatures in the area. The occasional elk and sometimes black bear, though I've never seen one. We pulled into the cemetery. It's 8 o'clock and the sun has set since. We parked and we got out. The two of us are always side by side in everything we do, as we like to experience things together. For some reason, we said nothing to one another, and I felt drawn back to the far right corner of the cemetery. She walked straight out and more to the left. I found a cool grave with some fake flowers that I was examining, and when I noticed how deafeningly quiet it was, I couldn't hear crickets or anything anymore, like I was in some weird bubble. As I'm standing there, I heard the fake flowers of the grave rustling as if there was an animal in them. The flowers being right at my feet were easy for me to shine my light down into and see if there was no critter hiding in them. As I was inspecting them, they shook again. I just got the feeling like whatever this was telling me I needed to go walk back to my friend. I started walking to find my friend and could see her light coming up over the small hill. She was trying to signal something to me. When we met up, she told me that while she was looking around, she heard what sounded like a woman moaning or softly shouting. It was like a long, drawn-out note or something like that she described it. Said it was coming from where I was. I didn't hear this noise at all because of the quiet bubble I seemed to be in. It was all interesting that we both had an experience that made us feel like we needed to find each other. As we're standing there talking about what we experienced, we hear loud branches snapping and rustling from this patch of trees and bushes to our left about 40 feet away. This spooks us, so we start speed walking toward the car. My friend shielding her face from the direction of the cluster of trees and bushes, and I didn't want to take my eyes off of it in case it was something dangerous like a bear. As I peer around her, I see what looks like a person standing at attention, but with nothing from the waist down. No legs, and it's just hovering there in the bushes. It looked the way something does when the moon hits it, kind of glowing and shimmering, but also not solid, almost like it's made up of fog or something. And I will note that there are no large gravestones in this area. There's only a few in the cemetery, and they're in the back where she had initially explored. So at this point, we're just full-on sprinting back to the car. We open the doors, but then feel compelled to not get in. It was like even though we wanted, we just were both overtaken by something and couldn't move at all and just stood there. We both remembered thinking, fuck, and why am I not getting in the car? Why do I suddenly feel like I just want to be out of here? Exposed to whatever this is. These next events happen very fast, one after another. So we're standing there, she hears the sound that I wouldn't even know how to describe, as I'd never heard it. It was behind us near the entrance to the cemetery. Then I noticed that in the other direction, one of the huge trees in the very middle of the cemetery was blowing around in the wind. No other trees were moving at all. There was no wind. We comment about feeling like we're surrounded and being watched from everywhere. We return our attention to the cluster of trees and bushes where I saw the figure and noticed a smaller figure on the ground. It's shining like it was in moonlight crawling on the ground. It flickered in and out of existence. It was like a faint bluish-white color, semi-transparent but solid enough where it would mostly block out the small gravestone. We grabbed each other's hands and just stared at this thing for what felt like only a few moments before it disappeared and then manifested about 10 feet closer to us than it was before. It just suddenly faded back into existence right in front of us. This was when we finally broke free of whatever weird spiritual hold we felt like was on us, scrambled to get into the car. We sat there freaking out, and she's fumbling through her bag to find her keys, and finally gets into the car. Gets the car started. We don't see anything anymore, and we sat there for a couple of minutes debating whether or not we should get out of the car again. Against all of her instincts, as this energy had been experiencing felt so dangerous, she rolls her window down and comments about how it seems like the cemetery got so much darker than it was just a few moments ago. It's like a thick, ultra-black darkness you reach out and grab. It's so hard to explain. My eyes sort of trailed up to a tree near the original grave I'd heard. I'd seen the rustling of fake flowers at earlier. Saw the same bluish-white, foggyish figure reach its hands around the tree and pull its head and part of its torso out from behind this tree and stare at us. It was at least 20 feet off the ground. The tree was a tall red pine with no climbing branches. We immediately peeled out of the cemetery, drove back to the cabin. Both felt disassociated and strange. What happened was so chaotic and terrifying that it was hard to process. So we're stuck on the timeline. We got out of the car and we only adventured for 5 minutes at the most before we had our first experiences and met with one another. That was followed by the noise and the torso and the quick sprint to the car. And this part maybe only took 2 or 3 minutes. So when we get to the car is when it gets weird because everything happens so quickly in succession. The noise heard by the entrance, the lone tree moving, my dog barking because there's another dog like a mile away barking. Then a neighbor cutting meat or something. Back to the story. The small entity crawling on the ground, it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. So it's about 15 minutes, 20 at most, if I'm being generous. That's all exploring and being terrified before we ended up just leaving. But it was 9:09. I looked at the time on the dash, and as soon as we got out of the gates, got into the cemetery 8:06, so where did the other 40 minutes go? We've gone over it, and there's absolutely no way we were there for an hour. There's just no way. We felt like we were being heavily affected by something in there, and we lost time. We're both of sound mind, not crazy. We ghost hunt a lot, do a lot of exploring, and don't spook easily. I've never experienced anything like this. Felt like just a barrage of energy intensity, and my friend describes it as whatever it was seemed hungry. Gives me the chills. Felt like it was trying to put us into some altered state so it could get us. Now, I don't know what that means because I don't know what this or these things were, so who knows what it wanted, or what getting us would have even meant. But I'm wondering if anybody's experienced feeling this way around any certain type of entities or cryptids or skinwalkers. At this point, I'm just at a loss because it was just unreal. We have no idea what this was, or what we encountered. I know this sounds so crazy, but it's true. I don't know that I'll ever go out looking for the paranormal ever again. It really feels like it initially tried to split us up right off the rip. Feels like it was compelling us to do the opposite of what our instincts were telling us. Put us almost into a trance-like state where we could all just stare at this thing. It's crawling toward us, and then we just lost 40 minutes. We really wonder what would have happened if we hadn't snapped out of it and gotten into the car to leave. Reality truly felt completely altered by this thing. It's the most bizarre, terrifying thing I've ever experienced. I think there's a spirit in watching my 3-month-old son. I've been noticing some strange occurrences in our home, and I'm wondering if anybody else has experienced something similar. Feels like there's a spirit watching over, or at least interacting with my 3-month-old son. Here's why I think this. 1, my son reacts to something invisible when he's on the changing table. He often stares to his right and babbles or giggles just like he does when me or my partner talk to him. It's like he's interacting with someone. This hasn't happened as much recently, but it used to be a regular thing. 2, the baby monitor moved on its own. One night while my son was asleep in his room, the baby monitor physically moved. We had the motion sensing feature turned off, so it really wasn't that. It only happened once that I know of. 3, temperature fluctuations. This room is noticeably colder than the rest of the house, even when the heating is consistent. When he sleeps in our room, it sometimes gets unnaturally cold or even too hot. 4. Strange noises at night. Twice now I've heard noises that sound like bats squeaking, but the sound's coming from inside the house. It always happens late at night when we're all in bed. 5. Our bedroom door moves on its own. The door is closed by itself a couple of times. I assume it's from the air conditioning, as it's happened during the day. But last night, while we were in bed, I distinctly heard it creak open. Can't explain that. Terrifying dreams with shadowy figures. I've had 2 vivid nightmares that left me screaming myself awake. In the one, a shadowy figure came out from under my bedside table. In the other, it entered the room through our bedroom door. My partner told me I was shrieking like a child in both instances. 7. Sleep paralysis experiences. I've also had sleep paralysis twice in my life, though not recently. Both times I felt a strong presence in the room with me. First time it happened, I was only young, but I can remember seeing everything as if it had red lenses on. The second time was when I was in my early 20s. I'm laying in bed when I heard the door open, and it felt like somebody was pacing around my bed. Honestly thought somebody had broken into the house. Managed to break the paralysis, turn my light on, and no one was inside. Not sure if this was connected to what's happening now, but it's worth mentioning. Weird experience at Camp Turk, New York. I saw someone on here. They were commenting on their experience with Camp Turk a couple of years ago on here. So I figured I'd share my weird story too. I don't think it's anything crazy, but some of you might find it interesting. It might get buried, but I hope somebody finds it cool. A little bit of information before you read. Before I took the job for the summer, I had little knowledge about the camp. I knew that it was owned by a Masonic temple to help the kids, and I knew it was an hour from Utica, near an old forge. It wasn't until I got there that I heard a bunch of far-out stories from people who tend to the campgrounds, and I didn't really know what to make out of it. They always sounded too crazy for me, but I guess that's just me. I think at point the camp was a nursery for orphans, but couldn't find anything online about that. So anyway, to the story. So, I was a camp counselor there a couple of years ago. It was a really fun experience, except for one night in particular. I'd always believed in stuff like this before, but it was very chilling when it happens to you in real life. I was a counselor for the older group of kids called the Topping Cabin, and during training week, we stayed in our cabins and go to bond with our coworkers. One night in particular, everybody went to go hang out in the church in the grounds while I went to go shower before I joined everyone. Anyway, I'm by myself in the cabin, getting a scope of the place when I hear someone walking down the cabin. I turn around, thinking it was my co-counselor, but no one was there at all. The steps were so loud, I could have sworn an actual person was walking down that hallway. I think it's my co-counselor messing with me, but nobody was around. Beside all of this, I get ready for the shower, and as soon as I start making my way down the hall to the other side of the cabin, I walk through the door. A chilling, heavy air just hit my body. My body felt heavy, and I began to feel sick. Never felt like this ever. 1 second I'm fine, the next I'm walking through a cloud of weird cold air and I'm out of breath. I legit thought I was having an asthma attack. Go to my room, sit down, close the door, and as soon as I do, I hear running and banging down the hallway again. Yell at my co-counselor to stop messing with me, but again, no answer, and after no answer, I ran out of the cabin. Ran out as fast as I could, causing my chest to kind of feel tight, and gunned it straight to the church where everyone was. I told everyone what happened, and they all looked at me like I was crazy, and I don't blame them. They kept telling me about how there was a ghost named Rudy that was in the cabin, and apparently, he wasn't the only ghost at camp. think there was also mention of a hat man at one cabin. I'm not really sure. The next morning, my body felt sore and I felt hungover. But once the campers got there, everything went fine. There was also something about the toilets there, but nobody there could actually elaborate on that one. Also, I heard stories of a ghost with a hat and red eyes in a cabin called Beck Up. Apparently, he would turn on all the sinks and showers there. Also heard stories of a nurse in a cabin called Cabin Allen, and the kids would see a nurse and at night feel the nurse put her hand on their forehead and chest to tend to them. Pretty far out stuff. So yeah, that's pretty much all of it. Like I said, nothing too crazy. Thought of it as a neat story, and the Camp Turk story for a couple of years ago inspired me to post about my experiences too. If anybody else has had stories about Camp Turk, please comment them down in the comments. Heading there to clean for the camp this weekend. Hearing stories about this place is really interesting from what I've heard. What could this be? I've lived in this house for 9, almost 10 years. We've had weird stuff happen before. But after a lot of work and went away. It's been years since anything actually super weird has happened. But recently, there have been weirder. About a month or two ago, my mom let my younger siblings start staying with us. I wasn't too happy about this. We didn't really know the girl, and I already hadn't liked her from how she acted and treated people. Plus, I'm pregnant and don't like letting basically strangers to live with us. Yeah, I agree. But I had to let it go. Throughout the month or month and a half that girl was staying with us, she wasn't the best person. My siblings' room at the time was the basement. I have the upstairs bedroom. My sibling likes to leave and be out literally all the time, so that girl would decide to invite herself upstairs to my room. Finally told her she needs to start sleeping downstairs somewhere. I don't care if it's the living room or the basement, just not my room. We ended up kicking her out maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Shit's been weird again. So while she was here, I'm babysitting a couple of cats. They acted fine at first, until this girl started staying with us. Specifically upstairs. They started acting wild at night, would never be quiet, always knock stuff down. There's one night when one of the cats knocked some stuff into my head and started sleeping in the living room after that. Then after a few days, my bedroom door started opening and the cat started getting out. Thought nothing of it, like, well, maybe I didn't latch the door, or maybe the cat just don't know how to open a door, I don't know. The girl had ended up sleeping in the basement again till she left. Things were pretty normal up until about a week ago. About a week ago, I woke up at 5:13 a.m. because I had a nightmare. I don't remember what it was, but I woke up and I wouldn't go back to sleep because I was scared. My mom heard me get up and start digging around the kitchen for water. So she came out and asked me why I was awake. And also if I was okay. I just kept telling her I had a nightmare, but something doesn't feel right. Felt like someone was leaning over me. I pointed to the basement door area and kept saying, something doesn't feel right over there. But nothing and no one was there. We walked back over to the chair I'd been sleeping in, saw my cat's water bowl was pushed over, which in order to get to where I felt like someone was leaning over me, you have to push over my cat's bowl to step over it. We didn't think too much of it, just that my head was fuzzy since I woke up from a nightmare. We went back to bed, and when we woke up, my bedroom door was open. A few days later, I wake up again. 5:02 a.m. this time, from another nightmare. I remember this one clearly. Scared me pretty bad. I got up, got some water, went to go get something to eat. And as I was walking toward the plate cabinet I just opened, like out of nowhere, I picked up my cat and went and grabbed a plate. Oh, the drawer opened out of nowhere. In my head, my cat was only protection. Laughing my A off. Made some to eat, went back to sleep, woke up, my bedroom door was opened again. Ever since I told my mom that something seemed off over at the basement area, the basement door has been opening. Even though we shut it and latch all the doors, my mom will sometimes hear my sibling or I holler for her, and we wouldn't have had it all. We'd just ask her what she's talking about. I hear the voices now and then, but I try to ignore them. My mom will hear my sibling and I next to her saying, "Mama," since that's what we usually do. We need her. But we won't really be there. Earlier, my sibling and my mom were outside, so was my cat. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw my cat heading toward the chair to sit on next to me. I looked over, nothing there, remembered he was outside. My mom and sibling not too long after that left the house. I thought I saw a black cat running toward my chair. We don't have a black cat, and it wasn't there when I looked up again. My mom told me she thought she saw her boyfriend's chihuahua run across the floor last night, but he's a truck driver and always takes the chihuahua out with him. When my siblings and mom leave, or if they're in their bedrooms, I feel a strong sense that somebody's still with me, watching me, next to me. Can't read a vibe, but I do get uneasy. Yesterday, my sibling was gone to a different town. My mom and I were looking at my baby clothes, talking about how, when I wash them, I need to go through and see which ones are outfits and fold and put them away. But while I was mid-sentence, my mom and I heard sibling's bedroom's door open, heard a cough, saw a shadow walk from the room to the opposite side of the kitchen. We looked and the siblings were still gone. My cat has also been acting weird lately. He'll sit in the kitchen and just stare at the wall like he's in a trance. You have to call his name and kind of poke him to get his attention. Or I'll just be taking a nap. When I take long naps, he'll just sit on the edge of the chair and watch me sleep the whole time. Just a couple hours ago, my mom was sobbing and I left just to come back to both of my siblings' doors wide open, so that's great. We've also been smelling cigarettes in our car, but none of us smoke. My man and I will hear things in my room, but he's skeptical, so he brushes them off and always has an explanation. Your car might smoke, though. A look back at my crazy effed daily life. I think even though the things that have happened are so difficult, well, at least difficult to understand, or in some cases, whether due to the absurdity or the meddling of other parties, difficult to even prove, I know more than ever who I really am and what life really is. Even though I'm faced with the future, which is honestly very bleak and dark, I can at least stand tall knowing that I spoke out the truth, and without it, I would have crumbled under the weight of illusions and lies that surround my existence. I only regret believing in myself and having faith in those many beautiful people who were in my life, always trying to show me what was real and trying as best as they could to expose the illusions and evil that pursued me for so long. Maybe if I didn't feel the need to look beyond myself for things as foolish as strength and knowledge, I would have seen the enemy long before they could do so much damage to those around me and myself. My short-sightedness is my only true weakness and my downfall, and I regret everything that it's caused to happen. It's a shame. The conditions and circumstances have brought such misfortune into my life and the lives of others, as I believe if even a single thing may have changed, I would be able to alter so much of my conduct and mentality to the point of even being seen and understood in an entirely different light. If not, of course, helped and healed all those around me affected by my parasitic relationship with what could only be called demons. Perhaps then I would have been so foolish as to see who were only helping or risks or threats to the point where they would depart from me. I'd still have a fighting chance in finding those true foes, those snakes in the grass, finally putting a stop to this once and for all. But I'd like to thank all those who put themselves in the way, simply to help me be able to see those shadows in the darkness. All these people were just showing me what they truly were. And though I may not be the person my family and I, to be honest, even my friends, want me to be, I can at least know that I'm not what those intruders, liars, possessors, and devils spent all these years to make me seem to be. To all those with the misfortune to never know me, even if they continue to spread all these slanderous lies against me, it prides me to know that there are those who, perhaps even without ever knowing me, can understand the tricks they use to make mountains out of molehills, illusions out of nothing. They may perhaps continue to expose the conspiracy and tactics used against myself, and certainly against others in my position. More than anything, I pray those victims, the intimidated, understand conspiracies such as these, and of course for scapegoats like myself. My future is bleak. I don't know what may happen to me. All right. Anyone around me, or really where I may even end up, or in what condition, Amy being or perception I will have, I pray that... Whoa, this is a little bit weird here. The truth shall be found, and so know myself within the light. The paragraph's a little bit weird. And yes, I was possessed as a young boy. I chose to walk in darkness, but I made my peace with God, and through others found the light within myself to turn back from that strange dark road, only to see I was led astray the entire time. I am who I am, and such cannot change. I can evolve and become better, and in so, maybe there is a chance to see my foes for who they are and fix my past mistakes. For now, I only pray, die a good death and live a good life, and to be the man my son would have deserved as a father. Rest in peace. Taking pride in... I think you might be emotional while you're writing this, so can't quite get the end of it. But I feel the energy part of what you're writing. Brother's smiling imposter. This happened quite a while ago, but I still get chills when I think of it. I was sitting in my brother's room before bedtime. This was in 7th grade. I was waiting for him to come in so we could go talk before going to sleep like we always did. All of a sudden, I saw him peek around the corner of the door and just smile. It was incredibly creepy and a very wide smile, which I found weird as he was very insecure of his mouth. This was pre-braces. The only light that was on was the one in my room. Well, and his room. They're right next to each other. So, in this lighting, it looked like the dark was engulfing him, leading his figure to seem blurry. At first, I was slightly weirded out and scared, but I quickly recovered, thinking this was him trying to scare me. It isn't out of character for that to happen, as I'm a massive scaredy cat. He loves to scare me by jumping out at me or make me, watch movies with jump scares. I threw the closest thing to me at him, a stuffed penguin toy. He just went back around the corner, the creepy smile remaining. A minute or two later, he came back, and I just sort of laughed and said, "You're so scary. Don't do that again." He looked at me and got very confused. He said he had been somewhere else for the past few minutes. Don't remember where because of how long ago this was. We went back and forth with me and just convinced it happened, and him saying I probably imagined the whole thing as it was getting late and I was tired. The thing is, I know I didn't. The penguin plush was still there. He's walked right past it in the hallway and stepped over it. Other than my own account, there's really no other proof. He swears to this day, years later, that he didn't do it. I only really half believed him. So while most of this was in character, and the smile is the one thing that wasn't, I need another opinion if sometimes just keeps me up at night. I'm wondering what the actual F was out in that hall. Anyone experience anything similar, or have any ideas what this imposter was? Please help. 2 stories I thought this community would enjoy. 1. A couple of months ago, around maybe June, me and my friend Fran went to the woods near my house. We were messing around recording videos and stuff, and I suddenly got chills and we planned to leave. I ran up the tall edge and started my way home. Then Fran yelled for me to come back and said, "Is that a bone?" I thought that she was talking about a plastic tube, so I slowly walked back down and shook my head. Then my vision shifted more toward my feet and I saw a skull. A skull that resembled either a horned deer or maybe a goat. It was only the skull, and there was a small ring around it. We didn't question it, and Fran, finding herself connected to the paranormal, decided to keep it. I kinda get that. Kinda don't. I thought it was rather odd. She held it wrapped in her jacket, and there was a small piece of the skull it didn't cover. Fran held that part against her own palm, and sure enough, she broke into a rash and get nauseous. Ugh. She said her palms felt as if they were held in fire. I began to get creeped out, yet went inside and into my room. Next day, she texted me. She brought it to her home. She said that she keeps seeing figures and had gotten kind of sick. She said she washed the skull, her parents found it and put it into the side of her house. A couple of days ago, I was at her house and the skull disappeared without notice. Might be the parents. 2. This was also with Fran. We were at an air bed and breakfast and I was showering. I swore I saw air as if it could move. I later found out that this was energy, but it looked like a black figure walking behind the curtain. Nothing. I was on edge and then I saw a feline-like form jump up onto the sink. Nothing. Kept calling Fran's name to make sure she was still there, listening to Weezer in the room over. I rushed out of the shower, changed, then told her everything. We used communication methods and figured out that there had been a portal. We didn't find this out till we were back from the Airbnb because portal and downstairs bathroom were the most repeated words. Fran described to me what the energy was, and since that I've been seeing it everywhere. The lights kept flicking and doors closed overnight, and I believe it was called a poltergeist. Let's just say that we were very happy to leave. A week ago, and Fran met back up and just told me that she walked into the Airbnb. The first thing she saw was a figure in a white dress. I don't know if anybody's still listening. I appreciate it. And whatever time it is, well, thanks. See ya.